speaker tonight, Joseph Woliniak, and let him introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you all for being on the call. Special thanks again to Miguel and Brendan and everyone at the Episcopal Church Foundation. I can't tell you enough what their support means to those of us who are our fellows. They really do amazing work. I don't know when they sleep, but they are incredibly dedicated to the Episcopal Church, and I'm really deeply appreciative of everything they do. And thanks to the Church of the Ascension here in Denver and to Father Lucas Scruggs, the rector there, for hosting me to do this. I don't have as reliable of internet connection at home, so they've been kind enough to let me hang out here in their parish offices. So if you hear kids in the background, they're either just clamoring to get in on this presentation or they've just been let out of the after-school program. But I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford, finishing up a dissertation right now as a visiting scholar at the University of Denver in the Department of Religious Studies, and I'm a lay member of St. John's Cathedral here in Denver, where my partner, Liz Costello, is a curate, soon to be ordained here to the priesthood in a week, just over a week. But thank you again for everyone, and very much looking forward to our conversation, our time together. Let me give you just a brief overview of what I hope to accomplish in this talk. First of all, I want to talk about some of the prevailing common opinions and assumptions about the relationship of science, technology, medicine, faith. I'm going to talk primarily about science and religion, but things that I say are relevant to medicine, technology, and so on. I want to talk about what some of our common assumptions are, particularly in popular culture, and also what the current academic consensus about science and religion is. Secondly, I want to talk about the Episcopal Church in particular, how the Episcopal Church approaches the relationship of science, technology, and faith, both in terms of its orientation, its assumptions about the relationship, how the Episcopal Church is organized, and what mechanisms there are within the Episcopal Church structures for engaging a whole range of issues at the nexus of science and religion. We'll have a brief time for Q&A and discussion after the end of the second part of this presentation, for you to share your thoughts, opinions, objections, questions on that material. And then I want to go into much more nuts and bolts piece of the presentation, and some practical pointers for dialogue, and ideas and resources for parish and diocesan engagement at the grassroots. And finally, I want to make sure that we have time at the end for some group discussion and sharing your questions, ideas, and especially your best practices. I've already seen this can be rather distracting to see how many fascinating people are on this call here to the left of my screen. And I know that there are a couple of folks on this call that I've tapped and asked if they would make it a point to be on this, to share from their perspective and experience on engaging these issues. So I want to make sure that we have some time for that conversation at the end. So I think I hardly need to suggest to you that the common assumption about science and religion that pervades contemporary culture is that these two entities are locked in inevitable conflict, and inexorable conflict. Science and religion are often pitted against one another in some sort of cosmic struggle, reason versus faith, progress versus tradition, verifiable hypothesis versus unquestionable revelation, demonstrated truths versus unchanging dogma, the human mind versus the Word of God, so on and so on and so on. Just within the past few months, we've had some really interesting examples of this supposed conflict between science and religion. Perhaps you watched the recent debate between Ken Ham, the founder of the Creation Museum in Kentucky, I believe, and Bill Nye, the science guy, who I was a huge fan of when I was a kid, who debated about evolution, intelligent design, the origin of the universe, etc. The debate was massively well attended. There were over 3 million viewers that watched the debate in real time, and there have been an ever-increasing number of people who have watched the debate on YouTube afterwards. There was a trending topic on Twitter, so on and so forth. So there's this fascinating debate. And also recently, Neil deGrasse Tyson has revamped the Cosmos series that was wildly popular in its early iteration with Carl Sagan. And this TV series has whipped creationists into a frenzy. And it's also irked some historians and philosophers of science as well for some of the claims that it makes about science. I could go on and on and on and on and on, but you don't need my litany of examples. You undoubtedly have your own, and I hope to hear from some of you some of the assumptions that you've encountered as you talked about being a person of faith who tries to hold together a commitment to scientific reason. But I want to suggest that the question is not whether there is a perceived conflict between science and religion in contemporary culture, but where does that perception come from, and whether or not it's accurate. So the answer to that question is long and complex, and is well beyond the purview of the 5-minute time frame I'm trying to condense this all into here. So I'd be happy to suggest any number of resources that will fill your beach bags for the summer if you'd like. But I want to focus on 2 books in particular here that were incredibly influential on our contemporary assumptions about the relationship between science and religion. Both of these books are written at the end of the 19th century and went into successive editions throughout the early 20th century. The first is the rather unambiguously titled History of Conflict Between Religion and Science, published in 1874 by John William Draper. John William Draper was a physician, a chemist, historian, philosopher, and a photographer. He's made a number of contributions to science. Including to photochemistry, early photochemistry, and was one of the first persons to take a detailed photograph of the moon in 1840. He was one of the founders of New York University's medical school and was the first president of the American Chemical Society, elected in 1876. NYU has an interdisciplinary master's program that's named after John William Draper. But his book, published alongside, or just before, a book by Andrew Dickinson White, who was an Episcopalian, my friend Luke Charles who's on this call, told me that. He published a second book with an equally ambiguous title, The History of the Warfare Between Theology Warfare, Science with Theology in Christendom. It was a 2-volume set published in 1896. Andrew Dickinson White, among being a historian and a diplomat, was the first president and co-founder of Cornell University. And he had this to say at the foundation of that university, that he wished it would be an asylum to science where truth shall be sought for truth's sake, not stretched or cut to fit exactly revealed religion. The titles of these 2 books give themselves away. They're available, they're not under copyright anymore, and are readily available online as downloadable PDFs, or you can read them on Google Books if you're interested. But their titles really give them away. What they do is they take a broad view of history and look at various episodes where science and religion have interacted. And they surmise that science and religion have been locked in inevitable and inexorable conflict since at least science arrived on the scene. The only problem with the thesis of these 2 books, hugely influential as they have been, is that they're wrong. Starting with Thomas Kuhn's hugely influential Structure of the Scientific Revolution, there's been something of a revolution in the history of science here over the last few decades. And scientists have begun, historians have begun to take a much closer look at the relationship between science and religion in particular historical contexts. And what they have found is that the relationship is a lot more complicated and also a lot more exciting than the conflict thesis presumes. Historians of science have gone so far that these days, whenever you're beginning your orientation to the history of science, usually historians will talk about this Draper-White conflict myth as an overarching yet wrong assumption about the relationship between science and faith. And the history of science tends to use this assumption as a starting point that it then systematically debunks with episode after episode. So if the relationship is more complex and more exciting than the conflict myth presumes, what other options are on the table? Well, this book here, written by a physicist and philosopher, the late E.N.G. Barber, Religion, Science, Historical, Contemporary Issues, which was originally given as his Gifford Lectures in 1989, I believe. This book has been hugely influential. One author said that it single-handedly gave rise to the academic discipline of science and religion, one of the fastest growing academic disciplines in the academy today. In Barber's book, he puts forth a 4-fold typology. He surveys what theologians and philosophers have had to say about the relationship between science and religion for the last several centuries. And he suggests that there are 4 main categories of that engagement. One is the conflict myth, and you can put the likes of Richard Dawkins or indeed a Ken Ham in this camp. And the suggestion here is that science and religion are competing for the same grounds in a zero-sum game. There's going to be a winner, there's going to be a loser, and it's just a matter of them duking it out and one coming out victorious. So that's a pretty well-known assumption that we've talked about here at the beginning. A second way of conceptualizing the relationship between science and religion is that of independence. Perhaps Stephen Jay Gould is the best exemplar of this view. In his book, The Paleontologist from Harvard, in his book, The Rock of Ages, he talks about non-overlapping magisteria. There's a great podcast I was just listening to yesterday, actually, where he talks about this and defends it, this idea of the complete independence, or this non-overlapping magisteria against a couple of scholars. I can send you that link if you're interested. But the idea here is that science and religion are not competing for the same ground. They're asking very different kinds of questions, and they have very different kinds of methods. So there cannot be conflict because never the twain shall meet. So this has been a hugely influential conception of the relationship as well. Then there are two more here, that if you don't buy conflict, that they're competing for the exact same ground or space, and you don't buy independence, strict independence, that they have absolutely occupy completely different spheres and have absolutely nothing to say to one another, you may fall into one of these two camps of dialogue, where science and religion occupy primarily different grounds, have primarily different methods, but oftentimes they will come up against one another, and the conversation between the two of them can be fruitful. Many scholars within science and religion today hold some version of a dialogue view between the two, supporting primarily independence, but also thinking that there might be something to learn from the dialogue between the two. And fourthly, finally, integration. The idea that the conceptual space shared by science and religion can be rather large, and that it is possible to integrate the knowledge gained from the sciences into theological worldviews. Usually people that hold an integration view see a one-way movement from science to religion. John Cobb and process theologians might fall into this camp. But trying to take some of the lessons learned from science and integrate it into a faith worldview. One of the points to make about this, though, is this. One of the fundamental takeaways, I think, for us is that conflict is one of only 4 ways of conceptualizing this relationship. Whether you hold to an independence view, a dialogue view, or an integration view, all 3 of those views are, I would argue, some version of the compatibility of science and religion, science and faith. And I would say that the majority of people who spend their days thinking about these things fall into one of those 3 latter camps. So don't have a tremendous amount of time to go into these in detail, but I would just mention that we talked about the history of science. Philosophers of science tend to talk about various isms within the philosophy of science, whether that's reductionism, materialism, naturalism, methodological or metaphysical naturalism, or indeed of late there's been a lot of talk about scientism. And essentially what philosophers are trying to do is to think through the knowledge that is gained from empirical sciences and to ask whether that gives a complete and sufficient view of the world, and if not, whether there might be a more nuanced idea of how we ascertain knowledge. And so there are a variety of positions on these various isms, but conflict does not necessarily hold sway within the philosophy of science. Likewise, theologians tend to, again, painting with broad brushstrokes here, but tend in general to talk about truth not contradicting truth, that faith and reason, scientific reason, philosophical reason, occupy legitimate spheres of inquiry. And indeed, reason can play particular help in illuminating matters of faith. Within the Anglican tradition, perhaps the most famous person in this regard is Richard Hooker, who talked about scripture, tradition, and reason, and how tradition and reason aid in the interpretation of scripture to develop a holistic worldview. So I can say more about that in detail for those who are interested. But what about the Episcopal Church in particular? I assume all of us on this call are Episcopalians and may be wondering whether or not the Episcopal Church has taken a stance on the relationship between science and faith. And indeed, as of the 77th General Convention, July 2012, the Episcopal Church has. A General Convention, the House of Bishops and House of Deputies, passed this resolution, A136, which was proposed by the Executive Council Committee on Science, Technology, and Faith, which I'll talk about in just a second. It passed with unanimous consent. I just want to look at a couple of the key provisions of this resolution and think about them in light of our discussion this evening. First and perhaps foremost, the resolution reads that the 77th General Convention affirms that there is no inherent contradiction between holding and practicing the Christian faith and practicing or utilizing the outcomes of science and medicine. No inherent contradiction. Secondly, that the proper practice of science cannot and does not automatically lead its practitioners or others to lose faith in God or to be led into beliefs that contradict the existence of God. Fourth, the methods of science, when applied to the search for truth, contribute to our understanding of God's creation, such that we should use scientific information after diligence as to its acceptance among scientific peers and relevant disciplines, to inform and augment our understanding of God's creation, and to aid the Church in developing Christian programs and policies consistent with our faith and our understanding of God's creation and our stewardship of it. The methods of science contribute. Fourth, this convention encourages dioceses and parishes of the Episcopal Church to establish Christian education programs pertinent to this complementary relationship between science and faith. So we've been encouraged by our church to establish these educational programs, and we'll talk in a few minutes about how to do that. This is a really important resolution that the Episcopal Church passed. And I just mentioned two things, one of which I'll come back to in a second, but that I was privileged to be at this General Convention and to testify in support of this resolution. And I came armed with all of these statements from various Christian bodies from throughout the church about the complementarity of science and faith, and I thought I was going to impress everyone in the room. But what was most impressive was that there was a group of youth there at General Convention, high school students, who were part of an official youth presence within the Episcopal Church. And they really spoke from the heart. They talked about how important it would be for them, for their church to affirm the compatibility of science and faith so that they could go back to their high schools and to tell their friends that you don't have to choose between a love of God and a love of science. And you could have heard a pin drop as some of them spoke about the importance of this resolution to them. The second thing that I would mention is if you keep Barber's fourfold typology in mind here, in a classic Anglican way, what this resolution is doing is not prescribing in every detail how exactly science and the Christian faith are complementary. It leaves open a variety of different positions within the umbrella of complementarity. But it does make sure to state that the Episcopal Church denies that there is a fundamental conflict between science, technology, medicine, and the Christian faith insofar as it's received and practiced in the Episcopal Church. I think that's a hugely important statement to make. Church of England has made a similar statement too, which I can send to anyone who's interested. So this is a statement of the Episcopal Church, but what about some of the mechanisms within the Episcopal Church to engage this set of issues at the nexus of science and religion? Well, the official body within the Episcopal Church is one of the CCABs, the councils, commissions, agencies, boards in the Episcopal Church. Individuals who are appointed by the presiding bishop and president of the House of Deputies to sit on various committees and carry out the church's business between the General Conventions. General Convention being a little Episcopal Polity 101 here, being the main mechanism for the Episcopal Church to decide on issues of importance to the church at large. So between General Conventions and various resolutions related to science, technology, and faith are passed. This body, the ECF for short, is tasked with carrying out the work on that resolution. As I said, individuals are appointed to this and serve for the triennium between conventions. This triennium, for instance, 2 resolutions that were passed at the 77th General Convention and will be taken up again at the 78th General Convention. One is a resolution on genetically modified organisms, asking the church to do some of its homework on the science and theology pertaining to genetically modified organisms to see if there is a proper stance for the Episcopal Church to take on this, and also the use of weaponized drones, particularly in armed conflict. So these are 2 issues that this Executive Council Committee is working on over the course of this triennium. The Executive Council Committee, and I noted just on the side of the screen here that we have a former member, a former head, I think, of the ECC-STF who can also speak to this, hopefully, at the end of our time together. But the ECC-STF came into existence because of the organizing and advocacy of a group of faithful, dedicated Episcopalians who formed themselves from across the Episcopal Church, who formed themselves into the Episcopal Network for Science, Technology, and Faith. This was a diffuse network that had dues-paying members. For a number of years had a newsletter that they would publish, I think, quarterly. They kept pushing the church to have an official body to address these issues, and as a result, the ECC-STF came into being. The Episcopal Network for Science, Technology, and Faith continues to exist. It's no longer a dues-paying organization. We've said that you are a member of the ENSTF if you like us on Facebook. So if you've done that over the course of this talk, then congratulations, you're a member. But one of the things that we wanted to do is to try to revitalize local chapters of the Episcopal Network for Science, Technology, and Faith. So that's in your parish, in a deanery, a diocese, even a province, that people who care about these issues could connect with one another, talk about some of the issues at the nexus of science and religion, and take action in a local context. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that would look like and what the ECC-STF could do to support those local chapters if anyone's interested in that. The last thing I'll mention, and then we'll just take a quick break here, is the Ecumenical Roundtable on Science, Technology, and Faith. Perhaps you saw yesterday, if you're signed up for ENS news alerts, they had a press release about the latest Ecumenical Roundtable, which the Episcopal Church just hosted at the Episcopal Church Center in Utah, Salt Lake City. This is a gathering of all major mainline Christian denominations, primarily Protestant, although there have been Catholic and Orthodox participants in the past. But each of these denominational groups comes together once a year to meet separately and to carry out their group's particular business, and then convene together as a group and discuss a range of topics from across our denominational traditions. It's really a rich gathering. started rather informally maybe a couple of decades ago and has grown into a formal annual gathering. The Episcopal Church is currently working with the Evangelical Lutheran Church to make a website and to get some social media up so that we can get the word out about this ecumenical roundtable. But as I mentioned, this year it was hosted by Episcopalians, and the president and dean of CDSP, the Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley, was the keynote speaker and offered a really interesting paper that we live streamed via Google Hangout and have archived on YouTube. I'd be happy to send you that link if you'd be interested. Unfortunately, I forgot to mute my mic, so you see me every time I make a sound, you see my picture pop up. But the audio is still good if the visual is not. But let me pause there for a minute and see if there are any questions or comments that any of you have before moving on to some real practical nuts and bolts and tapping a few of the members here to talk about what they've done in their local context.
Great. And this is Miguel again, and just a technical note. Since everyone was muted, I think the best way to ask your question to Joseph is using the chat box in the left-hand side of the screen. And then whenever a little bit later, whenever we move to the broader discussion, we'll try to unmute folks and see how it goes. But if you have any questions, please enter them to the left-hand side of the screen, the chat box.
And someone said that there's a laughing and clapping feature, so you're welcome to do either one of those as well.
That's right. Okay, Joan, I see your hand is up. Let's, since you're on the phone, I think you can speak. Joan, can you say something?
No, I can. Yes, I was wondering if you have any geologists currently on the Executive Council Committee, given that you were talking quite a bit about that in quotes conflict between science in terms of the evolution issues. I'm partly curious because of the issues have been raised more by, or lifted up by the religious right, especially in terms of issues about evolution. And I was wondering whether or not you've got anybody currently. When I was on the committee, there were two of us that were geologists, and I just was curious.
I think I caught most of the comment question
okay.
there. If I've missed it, then...
Oops. Sorry.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, there's some really interesting, there's a great piece that we just posted today on the Episcopal Network Facebook page about really early responses to Darwinian evolution, or revolution too. What's really interesting is that many of the early Anglican respondents to evolution, including Anglican Charles Kingsley, saw no threat in evolution to the traditional understanding of the Christian God. It was indeed people who tended then and perhaps now to have a more literalistic view of Scripture. There are some really interesting aspects of this historically. My advisor has written a book on the relationship between early Protestant understanding of the Scripture as a literal and also a literal reading of nature and the orderliness of nature that actually helped contribute to the rise of science. which is part of the complexity that I was talking about earlier. And I can send you a link for that book if you're interested. But it certainly is the case that today it's folks like Ken Ham who have a particular reading of Genesis that see a conflict when I would assume most Episcopalians don't see as much of a conflict. So thanks for that comment and question.
Joseph, there are several other really wonderful questions in the chat box.
Yeah, I'll start at the bottom here. How can we design a course for all parishes, Faith and Science 101, with some of the resources that you've shared with us here in the past few moments? I'm an active member of our Episcopal Church here in Raleigh, and I've never heard of these resources. This is from Jane. You're setting me up for the next part of my talk, so thank you very much for that, Jane. Hopefully, I'll have some really helpful resources that you can implement in your parish. But I also want to make sure Jane is from Church of the Nativity in Raleigh, who really set up an exemplary science and religion conversation in their parish. So I'm hoping that she will talk about that as well. This is from Rebecca, that you've spoken a great deal about science, mentioning technology in terms of our drones. In what other contexts will technology be addressed? Yeah, you've pointed out the flaw of this presentation, thank you. And that I'm not really talking about technology or medicine in great detail, partly because those two books and the responses to them, this Draper-White conflict myth, the focus, certainly within the academy, has been on the history of science in particular. Not so much on the history of technology, although there are some really interesting treatments, and more increasingly here of late about the history of religion and technology. I'd be happy to point to some of those resources. I do have one blog that I would flag up. It's listed in the resources here, so we'll come back to it, but in answer to your question, I'll mention it now. It's called Techrement, like sacrament, but with tech. And that blog does a really good job. It's very recent and does a really good job of trying to think through a lot of emergent technologies through a richly theological lens. And everything that I've seen them do so far has been really good. So that's one resource that I would point you to. But if you have any other questions, we can certainly talk more about that offline. Here, a question from Ed Olson regarding integration. What knowledge can religion contribute to science? That's a great question. I go back to the various isms that I mentioned that philosophers of science have tended to devote a lot of time to. Materialism, naturalism, reductionism, and indeed a lot of folks are talking about of late scientism. I think the real question is whether and to what extent science gives us a whole, complete, and accurate picture of the world. One of the things we've learned from the history of science from Thomas Kuhn and the Structures of Scientific Revolution is that there have been a number of revolutions within science, and science as a discipline is always open-ended. So many certain things that we take for granted within our scientific theories of the day could certainly be open-ended. Other theories, as we've seen here of late with the Big Bang becoming ever more complicated, could be confirmed. But science, I think, in general, if you're asking for my personal opinion, gives a very accurate description of the natural world. The question is whether that description is complete. For instance, in a scientific description of what it means to be human, is science in and of itself adequate to give a full and complete picture of what it means to be human? And for me, that's where faith, theology can come in to supplement some of the worldview that science gives us. But go back to that resolution too and say that science itself plays a really important role in our theological formulations, in my opinion at least, that some form of dialogue between the two would be most fruitful. For instance, the latest projections on climate change have really pushed theologians to reconsider our place within the world and our response to climate change. So that's one of the many areas that science can make a massive contribution to our understanding of the world and our place within it.
Great question.
Oh, great. Yeah. So if it's okay, I think I'll move on to this more practical piece, and then I want to make sure, run through this maybe quickly, because I want to make sure that we have time for folks to respond and share from your ideas and best practices. Speaker series. Whether you're close to a university or not and have access to academics who spend all day long thinking about these issues, undoubtedly, no matter where you are, there are community leaders, likely scientists within your pews, and ecumenical and interfaith partners who you could tap to put together a really interesting speaker series within your parish. And we'll talk a little bit about if you do that, please communicate to your local media that you're going to do that, because local media tends to be really interested in those kinds of speaker series. Second idea would be to form discussion groups or study circles within your parish, whether that's an adult forum or teen forum. One resource, and there are tons of resources, a number of them listed on the back of this presentation, but one of those that was put together by the previous iteration of the Executive Council Committee on Science, Technology, and Faith is the Catechism of Creation that goes through and addresses, in particular, doctrine of creation in light of contemporary evolutionary theory. And does a really good job of addressing a whole variety of issues that come up. That catechism is being reworked right now. It's available on the Episcopal Science website. They're working to try to get it into a printed form. So keep your eye out for that. But at the moment, you can download it all from the episcopalscience.org website. Follow the links to Catechism of Creation. There are any number of essays and books on the relationship between science and religion that I would recommend. One of those that you have right here in your files, it looks like the first file, the Grosvenor essay from the Episcopal Church of Scotland, called Sketches Towards a Theology of Science. This is a free resource from the Episcopal Church of Scotland, and a theological commission that they set up to study science and theology. Does a really good job of giving an overview of some of the main issues and discussing them from an Anglican perspective. It's free. You have the link to the PDF there. And they also have a wonderful bibliography at the end of that essay that suggests some really good further reading. Another thing I would flag up is the International Society for the Study of Science and Religion. Had a recent huge project where they asked some of the leading scholars in the field to identify the 250 most important books in the academic discipline of science and religion. And they purchased all those books in one big lot and gave them to libraries throughout the country and throughout the world. You can go on the website to see if the library near you has all 250 books in their collection. But the other thing is that they asked these scholars to give a 1 or 2 page introduction overview of all of these books. And that book, the companion to the ISSR library, is available online for free. You can download it, read it on Google Books, read it on a tablet, read it on Scribe. And you can get a sense for what the leading academics in the field of science and religion today have to say about some of these most foundational texts. There are also tons of multimedia resources that are especially helpful if you're trying to lead a conversation within a parish context. One that I would flag up to you is the Test of Faith that interviews a number of leading theologians and philosophers, historians from across the world on a variety of different issues at the nexus of science and religion. And what's especially great about the Test of Faith series, many of the videos you can find on their website and on YouTube for free. But they have some real digestible 2 to 5 minute snippets on particular issues that you can really tease out or drill down into a particular issue and start a group conversation with that resource. There's also a great multimedia curriculum called Painting the Stars, Science, Religion, and Evolving Faith that's available for purchase. It's a bit pricey. I've tried to limit some of these resources here to the free and cheap end, especially for those smaller parishes out there. But it's a really good curriculum that addresses a whole range of subjects. Also, the Faraday Institute at Cambridge and the Ian Ramsey Center at Oxford and a number of different academic centers have a huge archive of free downloadable podcasts, both video and audio podcasts of lectures from leading scholars from across the world, lecturing on a whole range of subjects. And both of those websites are fully searchable, so you can type in an issue of particular interest to you. And I would highly recommend those. Again, links to all this stuff is at the end of the presentation, so you don't have to write this all down furiously. If you missed it, Bishop Nick Knisley, Bishop from Rhode Island, wrote a book for Forward Movement that sold out, I was told, 3 times this Lent, called Lent is Not Rocket Science. It's a great little resource for use of personal reflection and parish study. I'd highly commend it to you for next Lent. And harkening back to what I mentioned about the youth presence at General Convention testifying to their resolution, it's just the importance of thinking about incorporating issues of science and faith into confirmation classes and catechesis classes for youth. Youth in high school tend to be really wrestling with these issues. It's a perfect time to put some of these resources into their hands and to hear from them, their perspectives on how they reconcile their commitment to science and their commitment to faith. I'd also recommend engaging campus ministry. I've had the privilege of serving in a variety of campus ministry contexts. And likewise, students at the university level are still really wrestling with these issues, especially those who come from contexts where some of the fundamental questions were not necessarily raised or dealt with. So if you're involved in campus ministry or you're close to a campus, think about doing some outreach within that local Episcopal campus ministry to engage dialogue on some of these issues. Finally, establishing a parish library can be a wonderful resource to people in your churches. Maybe looking back to that ISSR library and companion to see some really good books that you could purchase for your parish library. You'd be amazed at what people would take from your shelves. So that's something to think about. I mentioned just a few liturgical ideas and resources here. First of all, a sermon series. Both clergy and lay preachers could address subjects of science and religion from the pulpit. Our presiding bishop, Captain Jeffrey Shorey, has done this a number of times. And we have Father Scott on the call, who, if you see this picture here at the bottom of your screen, I got a Google alert article from the Telegraph in Macon, Georgia, that flagged up this sermon series on science and faith that a parish priest there did. And so that's a wonderful way of engaging these subjects from the pulpit. I hope Father Scott will, and some of his parishioners, so some of his parishioners on the call will talk about that. If you knew it, we have collects in the BCP that address the relationship of science and faith in a beautiful way. I've listed here collect number 40 in the back of the BCP. under prayers for the natural order, for the knowledge of God's creation. There are a number of collects and prayers listed there in the back of the BCP that would be really helpful for use in the liturgical context. There are also great hymns within our church. The one I've listed here is the Praise the Source of Faith and Learning by Episcopal scholar Tom Troger at Yale and Berkeley Divinity School in New Haven, Connecticut. But if you're ever bored in church, not that that happens to any of us, but open up your 1982 hymnal and look in the back under the subject of creation, and you'll be amazed at some of the hymns that we have within our hymnal that are not always used within our liturgical context. It's a great resource right there, begging to be used. And there are various potential tie-ins throughout the course of the liturgical year. There are various feasts of Teilhard de Chardin on April 10th, Copernicus and Kepler on May 23rd, St. Francis of Assisi, October 4th, and the Feast of C.S. Lewis on November 22nd. Any one of these feast days within our church's calendar could be used to flag up issues related to science and faith from the massive contributions that these individuals have made within the history of science. And perhaps you've seen over the past couple of years, there's been increasing calls for a Lenten carbon fast. Most of us give up chocolate or coffee or something like that for Lent, but what about taking a fast from carbon and trying to minimize our carbon footprint? There are tons of resources available out there for this, something to consider to implement within your congregation. I talked earlier about the Episcopal Network, the local chapters that we're attempting to establish within parishes, deaneries, dioceses. Again, idea of a speaker series or study circles, ecumenical and interfaith discussions, and especially media outreach. One of the ways that this supposed conflict is perpetuated is through popular media. So I think it's especially important for individuals to reach out through local media and social media to have other voices heard. Local chapters could also contribute to convention, both proposing resolutions and testifying to resolutions on matters pertaining to science and faith that could go all the way from diocese up to general convention for consideration. One resolution here was passed in the Diocese of Central Gulf Coast, endorsing the Clergy Letter Project, Evolution Weekend, that is dedicated to talking about the compatibility of Christian faith and evolution. I realize I'm running short on time, so I'll try to run through these quickly. Again, talked about the importance of communication. I have an article here that was recently published in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch by an Episcopal priest, Reverend Pamela Dolan, that talked about faith and science can work together for change. It was a wonderful op-ed that was published in a local newspaper. Reaching out through traditional media outlets to engage these issues is incredibly important. If you're going to do a sermon series or speaker series within your parish, it's worth contacting some of your local newspaper contacts and television stations and let them know that you're going to do this. They can be very interested in that kind of thing. And it's just the importance of social media. We live in a culture where media can go viral rather quickly. So engaging through Facebook and Twitter and other social media on these issues is incredibly important. Whether that's your personal, establishing a personal blog or using your personal social media, or your parish or diocesan newsletters and magazines are also great ways to address a variety of issues at the nexus of science and faith. There's a picture here in your top right corner of the screen of a church that had faith and science listed on their website and the stance of their church alongside other topics of what they believe as a church. So that kind of thing can be especially helpful for newcomers to your church. In addition to op-eds and letters to the editor and your local newspapers and local media coverage of parish and events, I'd recommend that everyone on the call think about signing up for the NPR's Public Insight Network. It's a place where you can go and put your name and your contact information and your areas of expertise wherever you are. NPR tends to tap on individuals within this public insight network to comment on a variety of stories within a local context. So it would be really good for some faithful Episcopalians to sign up for that. I've listed all these resources for the sake of time. I wanted to have more time for people to engage here. But I'll let you just read through those. If you have any questions about any of these, I'll leave my contact information at the end. Please feel free to contact me. If you have particular questions about things that I haven't covered here, I'd be more than happy to suggest some resources that are available to you. I'd especially recommend these selected articles and podcasts as a great way to get a good overview and an introduction to some of these issues. All of these are relatively short and could be used within an adult forum. But in the time that remains, and maybe we could stay a little longer if it's okay, to have some conversation about this. I'm particularly interested in hearing from Father Scott, who had started a sermon series from James and Church of Nativity in Raleigh, who started a science and religion dialogue in her context, and from Luke, who's about to go to seminary and with a science background to address these issues in the parish, and the rest of you.
Great, and Scott, I think you're unmuted now, so if you, okay, great, go ahead.
So is the sound coming through okay?
Yep.
Well, Brandon and Miguel, good to see you at ECF, and Joseph, thank you for your presentation. I'm learning. It's great. Just want to share briefly, we at All Saints in Warner Robins, Georgia, really looking for an opportunity to take advantage of this Cosmos series that was going on Fox and also on the Discovery Channel, and thought, well, wouldn't that be an interesting way to engage the world? I mean, Karl Barth talked about, preach with the gospel in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And in our day and age, it's really the television or the media. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to use science as a way to talk about our faith? We ended up doing just 3, but we tied it into the Cosmos series, but also used science as a way to explore sort of the different, the landscape of science and faith. And it was a lot of fun. We made sure that we talked to local media. We're in a small to a mid-market media-wise, and they're always looking for news stories, and was able to get some coverage, which was great. We had a writer come out and sit through the first sermon, and I didn't put him to sleep, which was good. And he wrote this really, I didn't know what he was going to write, so I was a little bit nervous about that, but ended up really writing a great article, and it's linked now on this series. So I did 3. I did the first sermon was on sort of the landscape of science and faith, from young earthers to intelligent design to sort of trying to hold science and faith in tension, to the other extreme, sort of the Dawkins sort of rant against faith. And didn't try to pigeonhole anybody, but tried to show that you can hold science and faith together. The second sermon I did was on black holes and God, the idea that you only know black holes and God by your experience of it. You can't actually see them. And then the third one used science, the multiverse and Jesus as stumbling blocks. How do we wrestle with big ideas, and how do we engage it? So it really became sort of a platform of really kind of, in a sense, evangelizing the congregation, but through the medium of science. So really happy to share more if that's helpful, but it's a great experience, and pretty much well received by the parish. We got one interesting article written for the Telegraph. A young earther kind of chimed in and said, no, the Earth is only about 10,000 years old, and that was fine, because we didn't try to say it was wrong. I basically said, some of these positions are hard to hold. Can we look at the exploration of science and faith and hold them together? And I think we can. But this has been great for me. There are a lot of resources. I had no idea. I guess I was kind of a rogue priest in Georgia talking about science and faith, and to discover there's so many great resources. So this has been great.
Great. And Joseph, let's stay on for a few more minutes, because there's such a good amount of discussion, at least till 8:10 or 8:15. But just in case people need to leave, can you please put your email into the chat box so that people can be in
Yes.
touch with you?
And I have all my contact information listed on that PowerPoint. But I'll list that here in chat.
Great. And for those of you who have to head out, thank you for attending. We will be sending a recording as well as the resources mentioned a little bit later. I noticed that Malene has her hand raised. If people want to ask a question, the chat box is the easiest way because, well, anyway. Or you can call in using the number that's just under David Emery's picture. The number is 1-855-742-3074, and that's the best way to have your voice part of the presentation. I noticed a few questions also during while we were presenting. So as folks type in, one of the questions was, are there any resources that you would recommend, Joseph, for kindergarten through 6th grade, which is an area that I don't think I heard you cover?
Darn. I wish I had something off the top of my head. My wife was a Christian Formation Director for a number of years, so I should have come armed with that. On the resources, the ELCA has developed some resources for youth with youth. That's, I think, a 3-part series, as well as some resources for campus ministry. Youth, I'm sort of defining as a high school age. But that's a great question, and if you will send me an email, I'll do some digging and ask around and see if I can't get something to you. But nothing immediately comes to mind. Sorry.
And Luke, I see that your hand is raised. If you want to call in on the number 1-855-742, that'll be the best way to have the conversation. Let's see. A question from Sherry Folk. Are there guidelines from Executive Council or perhaps from the network on the establishment of a chapter?
That's another good question. We have not developed any guidelines per se. There's one chapter in the DC area that was recently established, and we're trying to use them as a pilot project, if you will, on how to go about doing this. One of my colleagues on the Executive Council Committee is taking the lead on that in particular, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with them if you'd like to email me. I think the main question we would have would be, how can we be a support? What would you need in order to be successful? Resources are things that we can provide, encouragement, mechanisms for engagement, ideas, those kinds of things. And if guidelines would be something that would be helpful, we can work on that as well.
Great. And Luke, you are on.
Hi there, this is Luke. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. As Joseph mentioned earlier, and I want to thank him for bringing this to the attention of us, this has been a great talk, especially with the resources in a local parish. My experience has been a little bit different. Mine has been lately with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology at University of Colorado, Denver. It's a very diverse campus, both in demographics, education level, and religion. And I'm, as Joseph also mentioned, off to seminary at Yale this fall for the Episcopal Holy Orders. So it's been an interesting juxtaposition of both science and religion. and I've been afforded a lot of opportunity to discuss my faith within the context of my understanding of molecular and cellular biology mainly. And I think some of the best ways of communicating and some of the biggest hurdles that we face are kind of the stronghold that perhaps impression that science and religion have always been in this conflict, and not only have they been, but they will continue to be in conflict. And so a lot of people are just kind of thrown back by starting a dialogue in regards to religion and science. And so especially on the campus ministry side, I was, of course, one of the older students. I spent 16 years in engineering. But the way to open up that dialogue is, of course, to be able to discuss our faith out in the open. And sometimes that's hard for some Episcopalians. I'll just put that on the table. I was fortunately raised Baptist, so that was really easy for me to talk about and to kind of offer up. So my evangelical background really opened that up. But I've found a lot of compatriots within the scientific field, neuroendocrinologists, neurobiologists, some of the ecologists that I've talked to, and really opened up a cool dialogue within the college itself, and set up groups within kind of an interfaith, between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, and also kind of a science spin on that and how we interpret it. So I would encourage anybody that's looking to do this in the future is really the biggest thing for the campus ministry is just to start the dialogue and let them know you're out there and let them know you're present and without kind of this strong position to kind of just feather your way into these conversations. And hopefully within the institution of Yale, then we'll continue with the medical, a calling for the medical field and for the priesthood. So that's I guess my encouragement and my experience over the last few years has just been to open up that dialogue, start a communication line, and even if you just drop it as a quick note, it oftentimes blossoms and turns into a wonderful conversation down the road.
Great.
Thanks, Luke. I'm not sure if everyone can read the chat box, but there's also been a really helpful comment here from Yolanda Lee that looking at the Episcopal Peace Fellowship and other groups like that, some great models for local chapters, back to the earlier question.
So with that, we want to share some, again, contact information. Also, just let folks know that, it looks like there's some next steps. Joseph, would you like to finish? Go ahead.
I forgot about this part, but just real quickly, and this is picking up on what I think Luke was just saying. But my charge to you would be fourfold. As you go out from here, would be to marvel. I think at the heart of faith is awe, and our wondering at the beauty and majesty of creation is itself a form of worship. How wondrous are your works, O Lord, as it says in Psalm 92. So go out into the world and marvel at the picture that the very best of science and technology gives us of our world. The second charge would be to state your case by making, as Albert Schweitzer said, your life your argument. It's incredibly important for us as Episcopalians, as people of faith, especially those of us who are in the science fields, to be scientists and to be engineers, to be technologists, and to work in the cutting edge of healthcare professions, and to make your life your argument about the engagement of science and faith. It says in Gospel of Matthew that you shall love me with all your heart, soul, and mind. Episcopalians didn't invent that not leaving your mind at the door thing. It's right here in the Gospels. Third charge to you would be to go. That going is at the heart of the Great Commission. what I was so inspired about the early iteration of the School Network for Science, Technology, and Faith is that they didn't wait for permission. These were individuals that just organized themselves and said this is an issue, a set of issues that needs to be engaged. And because of that, formal institutions within our church came into being. But at the heart of that were these committed individuals who saw a need to engage these issues and went out and did it. So I'd encourage you, wherever you are, wherever you find yourself, to engage these issues where you are. And finally, my fourth charge would be to share. That Episcopalians tend to break out in hives when the word witness is mentioned. It's been co-opted by others, but I think at the heart of witness is just sharing your story, sharing your perspective, your experience with matters of related to science, technology, medicine, faith is incredibly important. For you to communicate and to contribute to the larger conversation in the various ways that we've talked about so far, to talk with others, and I've listed here the countering the clamorous, that tend to be those, the most clamorous voices, the most contentious voices among us that tend to get a lot of the attention and play. So it's especially important for people who have a more even-handed approach to these matters to make sure that they are contributing to the conversation as well, as it says in Mark 16, to go into the world and share the good news. And there's all my contact information. Please get in touch if you have any questions or suggestions for resources that we could add to this list and post online. That would be tremendously helpful, and really appreciate your time, attention, and contribution to this. Thanks a lot.
And the one final note is that in your email inbox, there should be a survey for this webinar. So ECF, we're always trying to improve our webinars, and we'll also, and I know Joseph, I think this might be his first webinar as well, so it's an opportunity to learn. So please send your feedback, and we thank you again for attending. So have a good evening, everyone.